Hello, I'm Tim Lynch. I am your host on Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. We are brought to you live the third Wednesday of every month. However, this show is taped because we have a very special guest here today. Our guest is Marc Solomon. As you know from our prior shows, if Mary Bernardo is to the legal fight of same-sex marriage, Marc Solomon certainly is to the political fight behind same-sex marriage here in Massachusetts and nationwide. Marc, it's nice to have you.
It's great to be on.
Currently, you are with the Freedom to Marry.
Yep.
And you are National Campaign Director?
Exactly.
And you've recently written a book called Winning Marriage?
Yep.
And what's that about?
I really wanted to show how we've gone about this fight from the early days here in Massachusetts to where we are today. How our community and how this movement that we've built has built power and succeeded. I wanted to take the readers inside, the state houses around the country. Plenty of the folks who are watching were in the State House here in Massachusetts back in the early days, but in the state houses in New York and Illinois, and then in courtrooms and in the White House, and then in our campaign war rooms over the course of the last 11 years, as we've really figured out how to how to build power, how to win elections, and how to prevail.
Yeah, a lot of interesting issues, and let's go back. Mass equality. We've talked about mass equality. We've had executive director of mass equality on this program several times, but just for this program, what is mass equality?
So Mass Equality today is a multi-issue organization working to advance equality across the board for the LGBT community. When I got involved, it was I first got involved in the marriage fights here in Massachusetts in 2001. But in the early days, it was a coalition that came together with one purpose, and it was to protect the Goodrich decision.
So you got involved in 2001. Goodrich was 2003?
It was filed in 2001, and the decision was in 2003. And I got involved with a small grassroots group, the Massachusetts Freedom to Marry Coalition, and we would go out to prides and serve wedding cake and build our lists, sign people up, get people engaged to help make the case. And as you know, that was well before that was when there was still a real divide within our own community about whether this was something worth that we should be fighting for.
Yeah, there was a huge fight. Not only whether or not to fight for that, whether we should go for job protections, things like that, or whether we should go for marriage or civil union. Yeah,
it was a big. I mean, back then there were. I was just reflecting on this today. There were just some drag-out, knockdown fights.
Yes, well, I remember that. I was on the Bar Association board of directors, and I remember them percolating with us.
They were intense, and they were intense for some good reasons about what it would mean to put forth marriage, which had never, of course, been the law in any state in the country, and there were people who said it would set us back, that we would lose a lot of our protections if we were to advance the cause for marriage. And there were others, and I was in the latter camp, that said, that this is what we have to fight for. This is full dignity, this is full equality, and this is what we need to go for.
You can't compromise on equality. You're either equal or you're not.
Right, exactly. And I was always okay with accepting, compromise along the way, as long as the vision is full equality. That was what was important to enunciate, that we are fighting for the freedom to marry. And then, of course, we won here, so then we were protecting the freedom to marry.
So let's go back to those days. We got the Goodrich decision, and thank God there are people like you who had the foresight to realize that that's just the beginning of the battle. Once the legal battle has been concluded, the SJC says equal is equal, and so you have to have marriage equality. Then comes this big political fight. And basically, what they were trying to do was to amend the state's constitution to outlaw marriage. So perhaps the way to start is, what was the political process to do that?
Yeah, so the process was such, I mean, there was sort of good news and bad news in Massachusetts. The good news is that it had to go through, the legislature had to approve a constitutional amendment twice before it could go to the people. So it was different from California, where you simply collect enough signatures and it goes right on the ballot. The bad news is that if you have a citizen petition, you only need a quarter of the legislature to vote for it twice for it to go on the ballot. And it's not that hard to get a quarter of the legislature to do pretty much anything. So, you know, and so we really had a serious uphill battle.
Yeah, and a quarter of the legislators was 160 reps, 40 senators. So all the other side needed was 50.
Right, exactly. And you know, it was always a very democratically dominated legislature, but back then the mainstream Democratic position, if you were to look at the Attorney General, the President of the Senate, certainly the House Speaker Finneran, and even, you know, Senator Kerry, they were, you know, none of them were with us on marriage, and they all supported a constitutional amendment to take it away here in Massachusetts. So it was an uphill fight.
Yeah, I don't think people appreciate that now, but yes, even the Democrats.
Yeah, and you know, some of the Democrats, like, you know, Tom Finneran, were our lead opponents, and you know, to have someone who most people today think of as very progressive, John Kerry, was was against us, and so it was definitely an uphill fight back then.
And then we had Mitt Romney in the governor's
exactly,
seat, yeah.
and he was tacking to the right aggressively, and we had George W. Bush running for re-election as president, and you know, he realized, you know, his people, I think, Karl Rove, realized this was an opportunity for them to, you know, to turn out voters. So they put these initiatives on the ballot all over the country. So there was, you know, there was a lot lined up against us, and that was apart from organized religion, and particularly here in Massachusetts, the Catholic hierarchy that really went berserk over the decision, and promised to take it away and work to, you know, I'll never forget the, you know, a couple Sundays after the decision, they, you know, sort of ordered every priest to read from the pulpit something that said that the decision was a national disaster. So it was, we had our...
Oh, I believe they called it evil.
Oh yeah.
And just as a personal aside, I had adopted my 12-year-old nephew and was raising him as a single parent, and that letter that they sent out, that the 4 Catholic bishops sent out to everybody's household, 1 million households in Massachusetts, saying that the proponents of same-sex marriage were doing the devil's work. My nephew read that, and I come home to my house, and this letter was read, he was 13 at the time, was read by him, and I don't know, I couldn't believe in the United States of America that something like that could be done. I mean, it was just amazing.
I remember that terribly well. It sounds like you remember it terribly well too. And for me, from my vantage point, I remember it as an organizer because we were out trying to galvanize, you know, people who are on our side, not just in Boston and Cambridge and Newton, but in, you know, in Springfield and Worcester and Fall River and New Bedford. And then, you know, and then to have I was like, how the hell are we ever going to compete with the Catholic Church if they can send out 1 million letters, if they have that kind of list of adherents? So.
Yes, and as you said, they had letters that were to be read from the pulpit, which is amazing. So, against all that, why don't you tell us a little bit of how you guys went about organizing the counteroffensive against that?
Yeah, so really at the center, I'd say there were 2 things that were at the center of our fight in Massachusetts. One was organizing people to tell their stories, and it was organizing, you know, the greatest weapon we had is that we had marriages that began, and the legislature couldn't act to stop the marriages. So May 17th, 2004, which was just a beautiful, exceptional day, that that I'm sure both of us will never forget. But then, after that, a few months after that, we went to the town. We had our field staff go to the Department of Vital Statistics and literally go through all of the marriage licenses one by one, and typed into a big spreadsheet the names of as many people who sounded like same-sex couples as they could, and then we organized them by, it took them months, literally, and then we organized them by legislative district, and we, we sent letters to each of them, and then for the ones in key legislative districts, we got on the phone and started making phone calls and said, we need for you to sit down with your lawmaker. As we did that, we also organized affiliates around the state in places where we had very little infrastructure. We organized a South Shore affiliate, and in the Quincy area, we organized a Brockton affiliate, a South Coast affiliate in New Bedford and Fall River, and and on and on and on, Worcester and Springfield, and it was really we needed people to weigh in with their lawmakers. Back then, there were lawmakers who would say to me as I was walking around the State House, I've seen plenty of gay and lesbian people getting married, but I don't know any in my district. And I knew that if that were the narrative, it wouldn't work. We needed to out organize in a big way our opponents. So
that's the tediousness of that task is just amazing. And then motivating the couples to come forward. I mean, and to me, I'm a litigator, and I'm always amazed at people who do put themselves forward, put themselves in the limelight to talk about something very personal. Yeah. In this case, people coming forward, not only to the state legislator, but potentially to the public about their relationship.
Right, and we didn't need people in Cambridge and in Jamaica Plain. We needed people in rural Worcester County and in Springfield, and many of those couples were people who had sort of lived with their heads down for good reason. They were afraid of what would happen if they were to sort of speak out. But the vision of being able to marry, and in Massachusetts, the right to be able to marry was a strong enough motivator for them to do it. But they also needed help, and that's why we at Mass Equality, we hired a whole team of just amazing organizers who would push, prod, cajole, guilt, whatever it took for people to, and then coach, for people to sit down, couples to sit down and explain why marriage was important. A lot of people would be like, I don't know how to talk to a lawmaker. I'm terrified of it, and they're going to ask me all these legal issues, and we'd be like, no, what we need for you to do is talk about your relationship, talk about your family. That's what you're an expert in. That's what they need to hear. Right. And so we did that all. We had, just I can't remember how many, but dozens and dozens and dozens of these meetings of couples and families with their lawmakers. And then we also went out and really wanted to barrage these lawmakers with contacts from their district. And so one thing we did is we hired a whole team of canvassers at Mass Equality, and we partnered up with Zipcar, and they would drive out to legislative districts, and they would go door to door and collect postcards and get people to sign them. And then if someone would sign a postcard, we'd ask them if they'd call their lawmaker, and if they agreed to, before they could think twice, we'd hand them a cell phone and hit send and say, okay, here you go, call it, and that had a huge impact too, both in a couple ways. Number one, it really did show lawmakers in more rural and suburban and working class districts that there was a huge amount of support. And I remember lawmakers sitting down and going through these postcards with me and be like, God, I never thought she, this woman who goes to mass every day would be for gay marriage. And but then it also showed how sort of relentless